cultivate a capacity for kindness. So, close your eyes. Take a few moments to breathe in and breathe out. But I would say on a deeper level, it's more like when we say work on yourself. That involves all kinds of like things about moving your life forward. And they struggle with
motivation in these things.
It's because when I don't think I'm worth it, I'm not worth fixing.
Chat, let's get started. Welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. Just a reminder that although I'm a psychiatrist, nothing we discuss on stream today is intended to be taken as medical advice. Everything is for educational or entertainment purposes only. If y'all have a concern or question, please go see a licensed professional. Welcome, chat lords and chat ladies. Today, we are going to be interviewing the one, the only pirate software, or Thor, which is a cool name, which I think we talked about last time. We had an awesome interview last time. We're going to have an awesome interview, I'm sure, this time. I don't really know what we're going to be talking about. There's no particular, topic or anything. We're just going to be chilling. We're going to be vibing. Thor is just so insightful. We can just listen to him talk about whatever. And maybe we'll learn something about meditation or the mind or the soul or psychiatry or neuroscience. And maybe not. Maybe we'll just try to understand a little bit about what's going on in the world today. So before we hop in with Thor, we are going to take a quick look at something cool. So this month, every every May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month, which we've been doing for 5 years now. Isn't that crazy, chat, that we've been like streaming for 5 years? We've been doing this stuff for a while now. Maybe 4 years? I don't know. I thought I started streaming in 2019 at the end of the year. So maybe this is 4 years. I don't know. Anyway, so we do community challenges every May, and they tend to be awesome. So these are things that we do. We connive to help y'all improve your life in a more structured way. So what we do here on stream and when we lecture and we upload videos and all that, like all that's fantastic. There's a slight problem, though, which is that watching stuff on the internet doesn't necessarily transform your life. So that's why we run these community challenges. They are much beloved by the community. It looks like we have 476,000 points accumulated so far. So Make It is a month-long event for Healthy Gamer. Participants engage in practical, creative, and collaborative tasks focused on the theme of together we can make it through, okay? So if we hit 1 million, we're doing okay. We're like almost halfway through May. So like we got to pick up the pace a little bit. I get to do a pickup artist review stream. So I will be commenting on pickup artists, which is something that I secretly want to do. If we go super far, we may see a guru stream arrive at 1.25 million. We get Kruti's commentary. But the whole point is to, week 1, make a plan. So this focuses on making concrete plans, goal setting, and time management. Week 2, make connections. This week focuses on building healthy relationships, communities, and networks. Week 3, make your mark, focuses on using creative skills and self-expression to enhance our mental health journeys. And week 4 is make a difference, using skills and passions to make positive, actual change in the lives of others. So this is what people have been doing. So 20 things that I'm proud about myself. So this is cool. Like, you know, it's about has completed my strengths. So like understanding what your strengths are. And there's a lot of like science that shows that spending time thinking about this stuff actually like basically improves self-esteem. We can go into this in more detail if y'all want to, but like there's a lot of great stuff about cultivating particular thoughts. And when your mind thinks in a particular direction, it does have a positive impact. So some of the goals of things like cognitive reframing and psychotherapy is to change the way that you think. And the more that you think in a healthy way, the healthier your mind will become and the more successful you'll become. Now, there's a subtle way to do this. It's not just like the power of positive thinking. It's not always see the silver lining. There are particular ways that you can do this that is effective. And sometimes if you like power of positive thinking, if you do that too much, it can actually be toxic. Has completed a good review. Interesting. So they like reviewed something on the internet. That's cool. Has completed an elevator pitch. This is awesome, right? So this is the kind of stuff that we want y'all to practice because this will help you in real life, right? So, hi, I'm blank. I'm a neuroscientist, received my PhD a year ago. I specialize in cognitive neuroscience and can provide good judgment on research topics. I want to make new discoveries in the mind and contribute to advancements in my field. Here are my contacts if you want to keep in touch, and I would love to hear more about job opportunities you have on your team. So this is like super cool, right? So I think this is like, I mean, there's a lot of stuff where we say like, oh, I need to get a job, I need to make more money, but what are the actual subsequent components of accomplishing that, right? So that's what we're trying to structure for y'all and give y'all like a carrot dangling in front of you so that you do stuff that's actually good for yourself. And so y'all should definitely participate and like, you know, start putting your lives together. Let's see. Okay, this one is. So this is good. So it's completed how I want to be treated. So how I want to be treated and then like listing that out, right? So if we think about how do we stay in unhealthy relationships, we stay in unhealthy relationships by waffling over what we're worth, right? And we constantly justify that it's okay that this person treats me this way because of X, Y, Z. And like sitting down and articulating what you want from the world is like very, very helpful from a cognitive perspective. So I don't know if this kind of makes sense, but there are studies that show that if you think through a task before you do it, you will more likely, there's a greater likelihood of success. So this is something called operationalizing. And when it comes to our relationships, like all this stuff that we've figured out in the business world, we don't apply to our relationships. So you can operationalize your relationship. Like you can think about, okay, what do I want in my relationships? And simply the act of thinking about it and writing it down can have some kind of impact, right? Like we're not sure exactly. I don't know what particular outcome you'll see from that. I've never seen a study that shows, doing this particular exercise has this particular outcome, but it taps into principles that have been scientifically demonstrated. Yeah, so definitely check out Make It May. And without further ado, I'm going to see if Thor is ready. Yes. I'm calling you over Discord, my dude. Let's see if you answer. Hello.
Hello. Wait, I got to fix this. Is it going to work?
Fix it.
There we go.
Okay.
Check and hear you.
I'm going to turn down your volume a touch. Can you count to 10 for me?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Perfect. I think that's great. Okay. I don't see your face.
Yeah, I'm going to raid. One moment.
Okay.
All right. We're going, chat. I didn't burn the entire queue,
Oh, this is guest name.
but I tried. We're raiding. We're raiding. Here it goes. I'm going to tell all the YouTube people about you as well. Here you go. Boop, boop, boop.
Okay.
Goodbye, everyone. 62 short from the end of the queue. So close.
What's going on?
Oh, one sec. The raid is out.
Thank you. You don't have to raid, by the way.
Yeah, but I'm doing it.
Okay. We're here for the memes, not the viewers.
That's totally fine.
How
I
are
want
you
them
doing, man?
to be able to see your stuff. Doing good, actually. Virtual
that-
camera. Is that working now? Let's see.
I know that you are in the field of computer, but if you're...
Yes.
Oh, there we go. If you're
Hello.
struggling, I can use my racial bonus to tech support.
Oh, is that what you get? You get a racial bonus to that? Nice.
So I'm the kind of person who I've just gone through life and I've never gotten proficiency skill in computers. I've just been riding that racial bonus.
That all makes
IT.
sense.
IT.
I don't know what my racial bonus is. I'm just generic white guy. So what do I get?
I mean, your name is Thor.
That is true.
I think
get
you have
that.
a racial bonus to axes. You have
Nice.
a racial bonus to hair.
That's true. I do have that. I have that
So,
bonus.
Racial bonus to axes and hair. Possibly drinking.
Maybe. I do have a high tolerance. I just don't use it.
Yeah, so that's
It's funny as
how
hell.
you been, man? So you're doing good.
Yeah, doing really good. In fact, I've been able to execute on pretty much all the things that I wanted to over the last when was the last time we talked? How many months has it
Dude,
been?
it's been a while, but I absolutely loved our conversation. I have no idea what, I don't remember what we talked about, but I remember just thoroughly enjoying it.
Yeah, it was super awesome, actually. A lot of the community pops in all the time. They're like, I just saw your Dr. K video. It's super awesome. So, no, it was super fun to talk about, man. I really enjoyed it as well. Gave me a lot of stuff to think about and kind of doubled down on all the things that I was doing. So,
oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. Yeah, so the stuff that I was doing with the ferret rescue, right? Mm-hmm. So I've kind of expanded the idea out for that now, where we're going to be building the largest ferret rescue in the United States, is the idea. I've gotten a piece of land, so I moved, or I'm in the process of moving. We're waiting on, the county has finally approved the project to be able to build fiber there, which is huge.
Oh, wow.
So we're going to be able to build a building that is going to be the largest ferret rescue in the United States. I'm going all in on that, having a lot of fun with it, and hiring in people that are going to be full-time veterinary work and management for that, so they can run it, and then we can have that as a side thing. And yeah, that's kind of the big thing that I'm doing with that. The game jam that I was running actually exploded, so we did 1,400 games for that. We ended up giving out $30,000 to the winners of that, so we've helped fund those new aspiring studios for that. So that was a huge winning for that. And then I'm looking into either building a publishing house or working with a publishing house to try and direct that to help with new indies wanting to get published in that direction. So that's made me pretty happy with that. That's a really long-term goal of mine that I had, and it's much more attainable now. Also, I hired on all of my moderators, so everybody is now, 6 of them are salaried right now. We're starting with half the team, then we're going to do the other half of the team once we make sure that all this is financially stable enough to do it. And they all get benefits, so medical benefits, dental, vision, all the healthcare stuff that I can throw at it, basically, and retirement as well for all of that. And I've set it up in a corporation, so the corporation's finally done. Did an S corp, so there's no way that I could ever IPO it. It has to be, I can never go back on that promise. We structured in that way to get rid of any perceptions that could happen, and then made sure that all of that was done in a way where basically the employees are going to be taken care of as much as possible, because I can't do this without them. They can't do it without me.
That's
So, yeah.
awesome, dude. So
Basically just executed on everything I wanted to.
yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about what is Game Jam?
So a game jam is a whole lot of people want to make video games, right? And they may not have sort of the drive to do it. They're like, I don't know if I want to do this. I don't know how to start. I don't know where to do this. So you give them a 2-week period and you say, you have a theme. This is the theme for the game jam. It'll be something ridiculous. Our last one was it's spreading, right? So like you're going to make a game around spreading mechanics in some way, whatever it's going to be. And they build that game as a prototype, and then they submit it, and then we vote on it, and then we give them feedback, and we try to basically build this environment where they feel safe failing. You should fail doing this. It's likely that you will not succeed. So you get a really good, safe environment to fail at. You learn a bunch of stuff, and then you move forward as a game dev. And if you win, it is likely that you will be able to take that to be a game that you can go and sell on Steam or show other people or whatever we want to do with it at that point. You get a bunch of accolades and things like that.
So people build a game in 2 weeks?
Yes. Oh, yeah. And it'll usually be a prototype that's kind of junky, right?
Yeah.
But like they get the core of an idea of something that's really good, really compelling, and then they can expand that out into the future. And we've already gotten dozens of games that have contacted us and said like, hey, I'm planning on building a studio out of this now. Thank you for doing the game jam. I'm so inspired to do this. Or people that say,
wow,
you know, I didn't finish, or like, but I never felt like I was comfortable enough to make a game. I didn't think I could. So they went and did it. The first one I ever did like this, I actually tricked our community into learning, which was quite funny. So many people were like, I don't want to do that. I can't make a game. I can't program. And I was like, okay, then we won't do a game jam about making a video game. We'll do a game jam about what you would do if you did make a video game. So they created what's called a game design document, which is you make a piece of paper that says everything you would do if you made a game, all the tools you would work with, all the things that you would learn, everything you needed to know, how you would plan it out. And then that was the first week of the game jam. I was like, it's just a week-long jam. After the week was over, I said, okay, second week, bonus round, go make the prototype. And they went, well, I already know how. I'm not afraid anymore. I did all the research. Now it's easy. And they went and did it. We had, I think it was 98% of the teams actually went forward and made a prototype on our first game jam.
Wow,
as a result
that's
of it.
awesome, dude.
Yeah, it was huge.
It's also interesting because that reminds me of something that we do in psychotherapy, which is so if someone doesn't want to talk about something, we use this technique called going meta. So if someone says like, oh, I don't want to talk about my relationships, and you know, it's totally fine to respect boundaries. We don't the goal isn't to push. But what we'll do is we'll ask people, can you help me understand why you don't want to talk about it? Totally fine. We don't have to talk about it, but what's your reason? So what we do is like, here is the thing that is psychologically activating. And what we want to do is move one layer like meta or one layer like removed from it and talk about the obstacle to the thing that is scary. And it almost sounds like y'all stumbled into that or thought of that, right? Which is like, okay, we're not going to actually make a game. We're going to do something else that feels emotionally safer and moves us closer to the topic. And then we oftentimes find that that's very effective at getting people to like open up.
Yeah, the basic idea I had about it was like, because I have a background in social engineering, right? It's part of my job, part of my work. And I was like, the one thing that's stopping people is they're afraid. And they're mostly afraid not because of anything other than they just don't know what it takes. And because they don't know what it takes, they're worried about failing. So I was like, well, what if we structure that around exposing them to what it takes and do it in a way where it doesn't matter if they fail or not? And it worked. It ended up working really, really well. So it was kind of stumbling into that, frankly.
Yeah, that's
from
super
that just
cool.
General understanding.
What is social engineering?
So social engineering is when you are trying to either manipulate a situation to get a certain outcome with another person, right? Or I use it more often to try and figure out what somebody needs in order to move forward or move past the thing that's blocking them. A lot of times I used it when I was in, offensive security to try and get into areas of access that I wasn't supposed to be in. I role play as a character or I do anything like that to try and move forward to do that, to try and trick them into letting me have access where I shouldn't have access or get information out of an employee that I shouldn't have. A good example of this is, let's say you're a customer service representative and I call in. And while I'm talking to you about my customer service problem that I have, I say, hey, I'm thinking about applying at your business. And I'm wondering, I can't really cook. I'm not good at that. Can you tell me where like the best places to eat in the area? Because I'll be there pretty soon for an interview. And then you tell me where you eat in the area. And now I know where to go to be able to clone your badge if I need to break into your office. That is part of social engineering. It's starting kind of a situation like that for an ulterior motive is the idea. And that's kind of what that first game jam was. The ulterior motive was to get people to learn, so you can do it for good reasons. But
that's so interesting. So so this is not coding. What you're social engineering
it's people dissection, right?
Yeah,
it's behavioral
is this
behavioral
like
analysis.
freaking?
No, freaking is phone hacking. So
Okay.
this is behavioral analysis, social engineering is. It's a very common thing. It usually comes down to acting
Okay.
and understanding body language and behavior. But a lot of it is done by intuition, not through reading. It is through learning that over time. I learned it hilariously from playing Dungeons and Dragons because I role play as a DM. Like I'm a DM and I have to role play a bunch of characters and I can see the immediate emotional response from my players. So I know how to act in certain ways. Streaming does the same thing for you as well. You immediately react to how chat is reacting. You see the things that you say, if they function or don't function, and how you say things, the inflection that you use, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Super
that's,
important.
That's so fascinating because you said role play as a DM, and I was like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Were you playing
You role play
a
characters
character
as a DM. Yeah.
who was
Yeah.
pretending to be a DM? Like that would be.
Yeah. Pretending to be one. Yeah, no, definitely.
I pretend to be a DM,
Yeah.
and
I do sometimes. It's good. Yeah.
that's so fascinating. So it sounds like you've the social engineering stuff is I think a really interesting topic of discussion because that too is something that so it sounds like a lot of what you do is very similar actually in a lot of ways to what we do or what I do, which is also trying to help people understand what makes them tick and how to make tasks easier for you to complete, how to understand your mind and like how it works in your brain.
Yeah.
And so that's super cool.
What?
Yeah.
Yours comes from a very different background than mine, though. Like mine is very intuition based. So there are going to be gaps for me, like 100%. And I think that's really interesting. I think it's interesting that you have kind of two paths that lead to the same goal there in different ways.
Oh, give me a second. This is my.
Oh,
Hey, what's up? Okay. Yeah, I'll balance them more. All right. I need to make an audio adjustment. All right. Hopefully that's better. Count to 10 for me.
1, 2, 3,
That
4,
should be
5.
better. Yeah, okay. It's showing. Okay,
I've been
thank you.
balanced.
Yeah,
It's
so-
finally happened.
So, it's interesting that you say that there's going to be gaps in yours. I mean, I think that is undoubtedly objectively true. But I think one of the things that I've learned about sort of like this dichotomy between like science and spirituality. So if you look at like psychotherapy versus like, let's say, meditation training,
Sure.
the yogis and these like Buddhist monks and people like that, they sort of had a sample size of one and they were just interested in the subjective. They were not interested in objectively what is correct for all of humanity. They were interested in what works for an individual.
Yeah.
So their laboratory was a single person. The interesting thing about the Western perspective, we think it's superior because it's scientific, and scientific is about objective truth. The challenge is that the application of science to an individual has a big gap. So even though we have a study that shows that cognitively reframing is healthy, it doesn't teach us how to cognitively reframe. So that is
can
actually
agree
a
with that.
subjective process. So
Yeah.
I think when you say it's primarily intuition, I mean, that I think is an interesting thought, but I think that just because it is subjective or a personal exploration does not mean that it is inferior to science.
I think it's experiential more,
Yeah.
I guess is better than the intuition way of saying that. It's more experiential. So it's based on my experiences and it's based in not in a clinical setting. It's more in a out in the world setting.
Yeah.
So that makes more sense. Definitely.
Yeah, that it'd be interesting to kind of compare notes.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think the biggest gap that I get in that regard is terminology. There's going to be terminology, like I said last time, terminology is just going to be missing because of that. Because it's like, I learned this thing out in the street, you know?
Yeah, no, but I think that the terminology is, it's really interesting because you mentioned that. Because there's actually an interesting study, I forget what it's called, it's some report. Back in the early 1900s, there was, so medical education was not standardized. So like you had all these med schools that were just teaching whatever the hell they wanted. So there was some report, I'm blanking on the name, that analyzed like the different medical schools and like tried to figure out like, okay, is there any consensus here? And in the process of that report, they also point out that medical jargon is specifically obtuse
Yeah.
to try
It
to
is.
keep regular people from understanding and preserve the status of like a medical doctor. That's why they use Latin for everything instead of just saying like, oh, you have like, you know, osteoarthritis as opposed to my knee hurts.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting because the terminology is actually used to gatekeep.
Yeah. I think it's actually funny is that reminds me of Idiocracy, though, because if you go too far in the other direction, you end up getting something that makes no sense. Where you're like, oh, my bones suck. Like, okay, but what does that mean? Like,
Yeah, there's a lack of precision.
yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, we see that, I think, a lot with our emotional vocabulary, where we're not precise about what we feel and what we think.
I think a lot of times people lack the kind of words to express that, though. Not to discredit or say that that's like their fault or anything. It's just many people don't talk about emotions. They don't talk about their feelings, and like society doesn't like you to do that a lot of the times, frankly. And I think that sucks. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely something that is discouraged. So one of the best examples that I can think of is that everyone says that communication is important for a relationship. They'll ask you like, oh, like you've been married for 40 years. What's the secret? They'll say like communication. But what does that mean?
Means.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does that mean? So yeah, go ahead.
Super common. It's just a super common thing, and it's true. It's like communication matters, but it's like what does that communication entail?
Absolutely.
And it means telling your partner you're upset. It means telling them that you are upset, that you don't like the thing that's going on, telling them why you don't like that thing. It means, and to be honest with you, sometimes it means fighting, man. Sometimes it means having a verbal argument, not a physical argument, obviously, but a verbal argument about something is sometimes that's what's needed. If there's an emotional thing on the table and it's deeply distressing, having a verbal argument about it is normal. There's nothing wrong with that. Just don't make it bad, like don't take it too far.
I think that's certainly an important part. I think one of the things that worries me, there are a couple times that, I've talked to people about their relationship, and one of the things that actually worries me, one of the things that I consider sort of a yellow flag or a red flag is a lack of conflict.
Yeah.
So oftentimes...
I learned that in the past in relationships of mine. It's like, wow, it's perfect until it wasn't. And we didn't have any practice fighting. We had no practice having arguments the entire time, and then we had an argument, and it was real bombastic, and that sucked, and it self-destructed the relationship, because it was like we went from this whiplash of just like perfect, everything's fine, to we fought, verbal argument real bad, couldn't recover from it, because there's no like getting rid of the stress over time. It was just like a powder keg. It was like a pressure cooker, right?
Yeah.
So it all goes off at once. You have to argue sometimes. You have to make that shit known.
It's interesting. I did a lecture a couple months ago. I think we uploaded it to YouTube about how red flags early in relationships are good. So like this.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So it's super fascinating. So like I would say 50% of successful relationships that I've seen as a psychiatrist, I don't do a whole lot of couples counseling, so I have a lot of patients who have very healthy relationships. And when I ask them about like the start of their relationship, they're usually red flags. Like in half of the cases, they're like solid red flags. So in one case, 22-year-old.
What kind?
Yeah, so 22-year-old with basically no career prospects. Asking out a 16-year-old, right? So big no-no.
Whoa.
With parental awareness. So there was nothing shady. So like the person like went over to the 16-year-old's house and was like, hey, I would like to take your daughter on a date. And parents were actually like, okay with it. And
how old was the person?
22.
Oh man.
Maybe 21.
Even then. That's...
Yeah. So right, that's what I'm saying.
Nah.
And they're happily married now, and like they've been married for like 20 some odd years, and they've got kids and a life and all this good stuff. Like it's crazy.
Started weird.
And the interesting thing is that the parents were really like because the guy was quite. I mean, they were like quite impressed, and they're like, this guy seems like respectful and decent, and also like seems like to really care about.
She's 16. I'd be like that.
Hey, look, I'm telling y'all, it's red flag is early. I'm not suggesting that you date 16-year-olds.
That's like the largest red flag. Yeah.
I've seen it.
Weird.
So another really good one is like, so two people met at a professional event, like a conference, and then they like text back and forth, and they like make it a point to like go to conferences where like one person is, and that's like the start of their relationship, where like, hey, are you going to this conference? Okay, like if you're coming, then I'm coming. And it's like they're not dating. They're just texting back and forth. And then they like show up. And for a period of like a year, they're just meeting randomly at conferences for like, every 2 or 3 months. Mm-hmm. And so that's the kind of thing where it's like, flying halfway across the country to see someone that you're not dating and you've got a professional reason to do it, like you can go to the conference and make it worthwhile. But to do that repeatedly, like, another red flag.
It's a little weird. I don't know if that one's as big of a red flag to me. It's just a little strange.
Yeah.
It's
there's various kinds.
Yeah. No, it's definitely different kinds. There.
I think the interesting thing is that when you have a red flag early, it gives you an opportunity to like work through some negativity. Sure. And so what tends to happen when we look for green flags is exactly what you described, which is like, oh, this person's great. And there aren't like challenges. And then when a challenge comes along, like your ability to deal with challenges is like underleveled. Whereas when you're with someone who there's some kind of conflict early on, like it lets you level up your conflict resolution skills.
I think that actually happens over time with multiple relationships too. Like as you have relationships throughout your life, you will have ones that fail and you learn stuff from each one of those and you get better at conflict resolution. You get better at communicating. You get better at finding out what's the line in the sand for you, right? Of like what works for you as a person and what you need in a relationship. And I think many people don't really realize that. They're like, I had a bad relationship. No, I'll never have one again. It's like, no, you will. You'll have more. You should have more. And you'll get better at it. It's a skill like everything else, right?
Yeah, I think this theme of being safe to fail, I think that's the challenge. I see that so much in relationships, whereas people, instead of thinking about it as something that you will get better at over time, you have a relationship, and if one person considers you unworthy of love, then a lot of people will make a conclusion in their mind, once again, not their fault, that I am unlovable.
It's funny, you see the same thing in work, as odd as that is, when someone gets laid off from a job. Mm-hmm. It's very similar in terms of the reaction, which is, I got laid off from a job, I am worthless, because I tied my emotional self to the status of that job, or I tied my emotional self to the status of that relationship. That's never healthy. I never think that is at all. Like, you are still an individual person outside of that. And I find that happens far often, very, very often.
Yeah, so there's a lot of interesting neuroscience, evolutionary psychology, and kind of like yogic stuff around that. So the tying of the self to a particular aspect is something that, speaking of terminology, in Sanskrit is called the ahamkara, or the ego. Right?
Okay.
So like we have this...
That's one I actually know.
Oh, okay.
So that's one I actually know.
Yeah. So the ego is when our ego gets tied up into something, and I think this is something that's so confusing for people, is that they don't realize that they are not their ego. So I have a conception of who I am, which is not who I am. It is just a conception.
I found some of that is also very cultural. So like I've been to France before, and something I found in France is if you ask someone, what do you do? They don't tell you their job. They tell you their hobbies. They tell you their interests. They tell you things that they like. And you're like, no, but what do you do? But here in America, you say, what do you do? And they're like, oh, this is my job.
Yeah.
So like, it's a defining factor here where it's not a defining factor there of what you do for a living, right? And I think that ties the emotional status to that much more, because like your title, your role is who you are here. And that's not the same everywhere.
It's a great point. I think it's absolutely cultural.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I don't think either one is wrong. They're just different, you know?
Yeah, so the yogis would say that all identification on some level is wrong, whether you identify with being... Yeah. So...
Interesting.
Yeah.
How do you have a sense of... I guess you don't have a sense of self at that point. You wouldn't have one.
No, all you have is a sense of self. You don't have an identity.
What's so sense of self without identity. I understand. Okay, I think I understand what you mean. So sense of self completely without identity. You don't have the extraneous factor defining who you are.
Yeah.
Just the internal factor. Okay.
So the best way
that makes more sense.
I would describe it as like if you're on a desert island for an hour and you close your eyes and you just exist on the desert island. And imagine that in that hour, what you experience is the entirety of your life.
Okay.
Right? So then you're not going to have a social... Like, you'll exist. You'll be there. You'll perceive things. You'll enjoy things. You'll be frustrated by things. But this overarching sense of identity that carries over from day to day, you just exist for that 1 hour, right? You don't have that broader identity. You don't have a social identity. And then the really interesting thing is that if you really look at your life is a string of those hours, right? Your life is just existing this moment and then existing. And then all of our sense of identity is actually abstractions that are strung together. They're not based on our experiences.
They're external, external factors that we apply to that to tie them together.
Yes,
if that makes
tying together is the right operative word, right? So when we string together a set of experiences, like a good example is someone who thinks they're a loser. There's no such thing as a loser.
They look at all the negative pieces and they say, "I'm a loser because."
Yes, they string
These individual
together
isolations.
unique experiences, whereas those things are losses. So you can lose, but the identity of a loser is not something that is like a physical reality.
It's not real. Yeah.
It's not.
It's a perception issue. That's really all
Absolutely.
that is. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
when
100%.
when things are fed through the ego, when our ego is the one that is doing the perceiving, then we end up with all kinds of perception issues.
Yep. No, that makes a lot of sense. I can understand that now. Yeah, no. It's always interesting to see, like, perception drives reality more than anything else. It is absolutely the case. And you get people that are stuck in these weird perceptive loops where they're like, "I suck." They're like, "Well, why do you suck?" And they're like, "Because I made a mistake when I was 12." You know, it's like, but look at all the stuff you've done outside of that, right? Look at all the things that you've done since then. What all the things you've accomplished. You like, you live on your own. You have your own place to live. You have your own job, whatever it's going to be. You've accomplished all these goals. You have a cool relationship. Yeah, but I made a mistake when I was 12. Like, okay, like you have to. That kind of a perception can tear someone down, even though it's not based in reality. It's based in just that, that little piece of a memory that doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I think like I'm on this shtick recently where over the last year I've been focusing a lot, like in my own life and with people that I work with, on perception. So I think perception is the one aspect of cognition that we tend to not underdevelop. Like, we don't think about improving our perception. We'll think about improving our logic, even our emotional awareness. We'll do certain cognitive skills to improve things like become more productive, overcome emotions. The one thing that I think is actually the worst thing in society right now is that everyone's perception has become very, very weak. So, like,
I agree. No, I fully agree with that.
Well,
we
how
see
so?
it mostly on social media. You see it mostly on social media. You have people that have extreme opinions rather than having nuanced approaches to things. They don't know how to perceive anything beyond the exact thing that they've hyper-focused on in that one area. They don't know how to see a greater picture beyond that. And it usually comes across as they don't want to, that they're being, jerks or anything like that. A lot of people who are in those positions don't believe that they're being jerks. They're just hyper-fixated on one little tiny thing, and their perception isn't wide enough to see the rest of the picture on that. And that's not like a malicious thing a lot of the times. It's just a failure to expand the perception. And it sucks, right? It's made the internet really toxic.
it really has. So I think that I would agree that social media, and especially like these short form pieces of stuff, don't add for. So the smaller the bit of content is, the more our mind has to fill in to add context to it.
People are trained to get a dopamine rush from that short content when it's not positive. When it's destructive.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say they're trained. I'd say it's taking advantage of biological certainty.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And it's not.
I think that's a better way to say it.
So what we know is that, or my running theory, I think there's plenty of support for this, is that emotional oscillation is what keeps people engaged in content.
Okay.
So
I could see that.
If it's too dopaminergic, you'll actually develop tolerance. It's just like if you play a video game for 10 hours, like, you're not having fun on hour 8. The reason you continue to play is because of other mechanisms. It's not fun, right? It's like achievement, finishing out a particular round, grinding towards a particular goal. That's why they have all those things, because if you really think about it, like, especially like MMOs, right? Grinding is not fun. It's never been fun, but people will do it for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours.
To get the thing at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
no, that makes sense. It kind of reminds me of kind of like hunter-gatherer sort of behavior.
How
right?
so?
So I'll give you an example. I go mushroom hunting, right? I do mycology. So we'll go and find like different mushrooms here in Washington State. Yeah, I do. I love it. It's super fun, right? I raise oyster mushrooms and lion's mane and shiitake and reishi mushrooms. Super fun for me to do. I really enjoy it. And doing mushroom hunting here along Washington State, we can actually go and get like king boletes. King boletes are awesome. But you're walking around in a swamp, and it's just gross everywhere. And then you see like holy crap, I got the big king bolete. And they're like this big. They're huge, man. And like, I've got a bunch of pictures of them. They're quite cool. I could send them over to you. But there's this moment where it's like gross, 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 gross. And then you find it. And you're like, wow, I got that. And it makes me wonder, like, how far back does that kind of trait behavior go for humans? Because that's a survival trait.
Oh,
That's a we survived because of this. And now it's being used to sell you things on the internet. But like,
yeah. So Thor, it always amazes me how intuitive you are about understanding some of these things. So like, there's actually a lot of really interesting studies that were done in the mid 2000s. The early studies on video game addiction really discovered that it is the denial of the reward that correlates with addiction. Right.
Yeah.
So some people kind of think about this as like random reinforcement schedule where like you don't always get, but it's not just the randomness. There's another part to it, which is if you look at like From Software games, like why are they so satisfying? It's because it's hard to achieve. Right. So like you wipe on a boss, you wipe on a boss, you wipe on a boss, and then you get, so the rush of dopamine that you get correlates with the amount of denial and difficulty.
Yeah. And everyone who beats that boss, when another person sees you do it, they're like, I beat that boss and I understand how difficult that was.
Absolutely.
Props to you.
Right.
So it ends up being a cultural, like, kind of group thing.
Oh,
Like
absolutely. So we societally, we value human beings based on the difficulty of their accomplishments.
Yeah.
Right. So it's
absolutely.
And so the real challenge is that this principle video games have figured out how to take advantage of. But the real challenge, I'm just thinking about this concept of failure and making failure safe. Because like the whole thing that's really interesting is the more you fail in life, and if you feel like you're a loser, in the same principle of video games where the harder a boss is to beat, when you beat the boss, you feel really good. So the really interesting thing is that the more you failed in life, the more I will see like a rebound. So when people are super, super behind and they get one break, you will be amazed at how quickly they can catch up.
Yeah, that's me. I got my ass kicked for a long time.
Yeah. And that's the real tragedy is that people who think that they're losers in life, they think that there is a linear, like, you know, the race is linear, right? But it's not. You can you absolutely have this weird potential energy, which is like building up. So I'm thinking about one particular patient of mine who was like 32 years old when I started working with them. And they had struggled with addiction their whole life. I think they finished undergrad. And then in the span of like 2 or 3, so they were like basically not quite homeless, but they were financially dependent on someone that they were close to, like didn't have a career, like, you know, just really, really bad.
Worst possible scenario. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And then within 2 or 3 years, they wrote a novel. They became a therapist themselves and like got healthy, like got into a healthy relationship. And in like 3 years, like they went from like 0 to hero. You know, and like they've got a stable job, they do work that pays them well, and like they find like invigorating and gratifying. And in addition to working 32 clinical hours a week, they spend 30 hours a week working on their like fiction novel, and they like wrote a novel. And in the span of 3 years, it's just amazing how much someone can accomplish. And looking at what they were, how they were at the age of 35, like you would never know that this person was behind.
Like that. Yeah. It's the same thing. Like, I've got a buddy on here, Primogen. He's another streamer, streams programming. He talks about it all the time. He was a meth addict, right? He was addicted to meth, and he managed to dig himself out of that. Went to work at Netflix. Awesome programmer. Now he's quit Netflix and now does this stuff full time and is like kicking a huge amount of ass. Dude is amazing.
Yeah.
And it shows you, and it's funny too, because people contact me, they're like, I struggle with addiction. And you can't really fix that for them. A lot of times you just say, hey, look over here. You can see that people can get out of this. And then you show them like, it is possible. And I think that does a lot of good. A lot of the times it's just showing them it is possible to succeed, even in that very rough scenario that you're in, you know?
Yeah.
So that's usually what I do is I'm like, look at Prime. He did it. You can. It is possible to do this, but you'll have to find your route, you know?
Yeah, I think that's the challenge, right? Is that's where the ego comes. That's where the ego comes in. And the ego says, they did it, but I can't do it because I'm different.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing is it ends up being, you end up being your own worst enemy there. That's the best advice that I have for that one is then make a bet with yourself. Tell yourself, okay, I'll see if I can do it. I'm going to give myself 3 months. I'm going to see if I can. I'm going to put that to the side. I'm going to put all the fears to the side. I'm just going to do this. We're going to make a bet. If that is right, if I can't do it, then at the end of 3 months, I'll have accomplished nothing. But if at the end of 3 months I've made even a step forward of progress, then it means that I can do this and I can keep doing this. And it's just a short bet, right? And what do you got to lose? Nothing, really. So people try when they're given that kind of idea, like, oh, I could just make a bet on this. I could try it. And they'll usually find that in 3 months, they've made some sort of progress. And they can look back and be like, now I've documented evidence. I'm kicking ass. I can keep moving forward. And they just keep making the bet. And I found that works really, really well, especially for people that don't believe in themselves. And it's usually because of like imposter syndrome. You have like an imposter syndrome scenario where someone just has that little voice in the back of their head that's telling them you're not good enough. You're not going to be able to do this. And I find that that is more of a defense mechanism than anything else. They're trying to protect themselves from failure. So if you make that little bet and you say, hey, I don't believe you, but we'll find out if you're right or not. And it works,
Yeah, so it's really interesting because I think there's a lot of cool mechanisms at play there, and I love the strategy. So a couple of things that I'm kind of hearing. The first is that there's a really fascinating study about feeling overwhelmed. So a lot of times people think that feeling overwhelmed is a consequence of how many things you're dealing with, right? So if I'm dealing with 10 things, then I'm going to feel overwhelmed. Like this is objective. So
I think it's very subjective. It's very different for every person. Yeah.
So it's really interesting. But what there's a lot of research on anxiety, which shows that the degree of overwhelmed you feel does not correlate with the number of things that you have to deal with. So
Okay,
you
I can agree with that.
can deal with one thing or 10 things. That's not that's the feeling of overwhelmed is what percentage of things that you are dealing with did you choose to deal with?
I agree with that.
So there's this concept called active challenges and passive challenges. Passive challenges are like aggro. Like they're like challenges in your life that aggroed you when you were like walking down the street. So things like, oh, my parents have cancer or something like that. Like, or some,
aggro, Jesus.
Yeah, that's
rough.
bad aggro,
Yeah.
like, some negative downturn in the economy, like things that you can't control. So the really interesting thing is that there's your mind keeps a ratio, like subconsciously, of stuff that I signed up for, stuff that I didn't sign up for. And when the majority of my life is doing things that I did not sign up for, this is what leads to burnout. So the really crazy thing is, and feeling overwhelmed, and then like not actually being able to deal with those things. So the crazy thing is that if you're feeling overwhelmed in life, the right move is not to do less. It's actually to take on more that is intentional.
Things that you can control.
Absolutely. So if there are like 5 things that I'm dealing with that are outside of my control, to take on 2 things will actually improve my performance over time.
I actually really like that. That's not something that I've ever thought about in that direction. I think that's really interesting, because usually when it's something like that, I had never drawn the correlation between things that you did control or did not control. And it's true. I've seen that for myself many times, right? Where I'm dealing with a whole bunch of things and I can handle a whole bunch of projects, spin a bunch of plates, no problem. And then you have something that's like throwing a wrench into the machine, and it's like, oh, it's like, now I got to handle this thing. It's so irritating. Yeah.
And I think it's
I get it.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was saying I get that. That actually makes complete sense, and it's not something I ever thought about. Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
So
that's good.
I think when when I first heard what you've been up to, it sounds like you had done this Ferret Reserve, this game jam. You're working on their publishing house. It also sounds like you're streaming. I don't know if you have like a job.
This is the job.
Okay. Yeah. So you're a full-time streamer. I didn't know.
Oh yeah.
So it's interesting because someone will look at that and they'll think like, oh my God, like this person is doing so much. How is Thor superhuman? Well, he is. He does have that.
I sleep 5 hours a day. That's the superhuman part. That's the mutant. Right?
But I think that's what I tend to find is that when people take on more, they tend to do better. And the other really interesting thing is that when you give someone this 3-month challenge, it moves them out of the realm of cognition and into the realm of action. And any shift from cognition to action is almost always a good one. And when people are just stuck in their own head, like what's going to happen is your mind will play through all these different scenarios that'll be hypothetical, but you won't ever actually get additional data to counter your perceptions.
That's the biggest problem with it. Is you have to have evidence. Otherwise, the perception is just going to take over. Like if you're sitting there telling yourself you can't do it all day and you don't have any evidence to the contrary, you're probably going to believe it. And if you give yourself even a moment to have any type of evidence, you can defeat that immediately. Like, well, what about that? And it just disappears. It floats away.
So I think it's challenging because depending on your mind will shape the evidence. So what happens for a lot of people is that, they will try things and in their mind they acted, but it's so challenging because our mind can shape our experience.
Yeah.
And there are ways to kind of get around that, or there are ways to clean out what our experience is so that it's more objective as opposed to not being shaped by the mind. But
That's a really tough one, to be honest with you, changing it from like the subjective opinion to the objective opinion of what's going on, especially when you're the actor involved in that, right? When you're the one taking the action, that's really difficult for people.
yeah, so it turns out it comes back to perception. So if you look at like any action that you take, there is the objective reality, and then there is what your mind adds to the reality. So what is the significance of someone not calling you back today? What is the significance of an email from a company that says, hey, we really liked you, but we just don't have a position that fits at the moment?
Yep.
And some people will interpret that as, oh, they don't like me. And some people will interpret that as, they do like me, I have value, but they don't have a position that fits.
Yeah.
So some people
that's why I like analytics so much. Like that's something that I drive a lot of our businesses based on analytics, right? And I do that specifically because it's an immutable fact. It's one of those ones where it's like you have this thing that is evidence of what's going on beyond whatever your perception could be. You could have perception that may back it up and move in different directions for ideas you can try, but you have solid evidence of what is going on.
How do you use analytics?
I use analytics for anything that we want to do in terms of business direction. So anytime I'm doing anything, I find out if people like that thing. We kind of do tests on it and be like, hey, I talk about this thing, or we look at some game or anything like that. If I'm getting a sponsor in, right, and we play a sponsored game, I go and show them analytics, be like, this is how many people wanted to engage with this. People may find that a game is really fun to watch. They just don't want to play it. Or people may find that they want to stop watching me to go play the game. So like, if you're streaming a video game that you've been sponsored for and suddenly half of your audience disappears, a lot of streamers would probably freak out. They'd be like, oh no, maybe people hate this. But if you go and look at the analytics on SteamDB for the game, you may find that the amount of players in the game has skyrocketed as a result of this. They just stopped watching you to go play it because they thought it was compelling enough. So you have to use analytics to kind of get rid of whatever worried perception you can have, because it ends up being a fact, right? And you can find that out. As an example of this, is quite funny. One of the best watched videos that I have on my YouTube is me playing through Outer Wilds. But one of my worst stream days was Outer Wilds, because at the beginning of that stream, I told people, don't watch me play this if you haven't played it before, because it'll ruin the game for you. And they left. It was like 2/3 of the audience just left. So it's like the worst viewership I've ever had for that kind of a stream, but the best YouTube video, because after they played the game, they wanted to go see how I experienced it after they could no longer be spoiled. Yeah. So you have to use analytics. You have to. Otherwise, you run into these weird walls where I would have a negative perception. I'd be like, oh, well, I should never touch that game again. But like, no, you should. You should learn about that,
Yeah, so it was interesting. I gave a talk at, I think, GDC about 2 or 3 years ago. I forget.
Yeah.
But I was talking to some advertisers about sponsorships, and one of my beliefs is that I know a lot of sponsors want a 60-second thing within the first 2 minutes of the video.
Yeah.
But I was explaining to them that I think that if you really look at user behavior, a sponsorship at the end of a video that is tightly tied to the content of the video will do way better than something at the beginning, because everyone's like, we want more eyes, but those eyes are not engaged. Right.
Yeah.
So people are like, oh, this is they'll just skip past it. Whereas if you have a sponsorship that is at the end of the video related to the topic of the video, I suspect that the user behavior will be a lot better. In terms of what people like, even though fewer people will watch the ad, their ability to engage with whatever the advertiser or the sponsor ultimately wants may actually be way higher. So I think there's a lot of challenges with the way that we get data. And we see this a lot in the content creator, burnout management stuff that we do, where the internet gives us, and platforms give us a lot of data that I don't think is actually helpful. They just give it because that's what they can measure. This is the big problem with dating apps, is that they can't measure the things that actually correlate with success in a relationship. They can just upload pictures and you can write things about yourself, but there are no studies that show that making a good bio correlates with relationship. I mean, I'm sure that would be true in a sense, because it's got to get you more dates. But if you look at the things that correlate with success in relationships, they're not things that dating apps can detect or select for.
You also get a lot of really weird gotcha images and things online that I find where people will be like, look at how many times I had to send out a thing before I got one reply. And it'll be like, look, 5,000, dates and like it's one relationship. And I think those are pretty misleading as well because it doesn't show you the full story there of each of those interactions, like how many swipes you did or anything. None of that matters, frankly.
Well,
Like, I find that to be very.
I think it's incredibly misleading for a whole host of other reasons.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of reasons that it's misleading, but I think that one is demoralizing to people in a way that's weird, like really bad. It's not benefiting anyone to put that out.
Have you heard of this concept of the missing reasons?
No.
So this is so fascinating. I got to send you all this link. This is one of the most brilliant psychological explorations that I've seen.
I sent you the mushrooms, by the way.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Try that.
So there's like, if you look at posts online, especially about relationships, there's this great psychologist, I think, or maybe it's not even a psychologist, who wrote this book about the missing reasons. So it is, so basically like when someone shares a story online, there will be things missing from the story. And the things that are missing from the story are really where the money is. Right? So someone will say, oh, like I've been married for 30 years and then my partner just woke up and just walked out of the house and took my kids. They refused to talk to me. They blocked me on all my numbers, like, and then they'll like frame things in some kind of like victim mentality, but there's like stuff missing from the story.
Yeah.
And so I think it's all this
so common.
Yeah, so common.
Yeah.
And even in our own lives, if you really pay attention to the ego, the cool thing about the ego is that the ego believes it's logical, but it's very selective. So the nature of the ego is to ignore information that does not align with what your ego wants in that moment. And so and even Carl Jung, I know I'm kind of bouncing all over the place, but Carl Jung, I think, discovered this when he was talking about this concept of the shadow, which is even within our own psychology and in our own psyche. There are parts of our psyche that we actively suppress or ignore. And if you want to grow, those are the things that you need to confront, because that's really where the problem is. And if you kind of think about if there's a part of life that you're not looking at, if that part of life is not fixed, you will never be able to fix it. And so a lot of times people don't realize that, they're living this life that things are going bad, things are going bad, things are going bad, and they feel like they're a victim because this person screwed me over, this person screwed me over, this person screwed me over. But
what's the funniest thing about that?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go for it.
I think the funniest thing about that is you can equate it to League of Legends or any competitive game.
Oh.
If you're in bronze, it is more likely that you're going to blame the rest of your entire team for your team failing when you're not focusing on you doing better at the video game, which is going to increase your elo.
So
this happens all the time in competitive games. Like 100%. If you're in bronze, you deserve to be in bronze.
I've got a cool paper to show you.
Hell yeah.
Give me a second.
But that's really what that is like you need to focus on improving yourself and improving your own performance there, not tearing down your teammates. So it's not going to help you.
I got to find it, but.
What do you mean it's always my team? No, it ain't.
It's, come on, where's this paper? I know I've got it. Come on.
You still can't carry 4 people? No, that's true. You can't carry all of your team all of the time. But in times where you could make a difference, your performance is what matters. And you'll win more often that way. And then you'll climb.
So I gotta do some shenanigans on my stream setup because I got a screen share with you on Discord.
Shenanigans. I can watch the stream. I can do that if that's easier.
Well, I want to show people too. So let me see if I can do this. Browser plus 2 cam. Does this work? Oh, sweet. Oh my God. Dude, mods for the win. Fucking, this is great. So now I can still see you and show this. So this is great.
Hell yeah.
So, cognitive flexibility and decision-making predicts expertise in the MOBA esport League of Legends. So look at this. So you're saying that, like, when you blame your teammates all the time. So there's one thing that correlates with rank, okay? So data was analyzed by a means of correlation and multiple regression analysis. Results showed that cognitive flexibility was positively related to rank percentile, p less than 0.011. So this is a pretty big confidence interval. So I don't know exactly how they measure this, but it seems like it correlates a lot with rank because this number is big, but it's very wide.
Interesting.
Right. So, and what we're talking about is like the ability to pay attention, like the ability to not think the way that you're thinking. That's what cognitive flexibility is. So when people constantly blame their teammates, there's no cognitive flexibility, right? My team sucks, my team sucks, my team sucks. They're not flexible. Let me just make sure. Yeah, we don't need this one.
If you turn around and you go, but maybe I suck. And then
Yeah.
you work on it. You go and look at the analytics and you find out where were you sucking. You find out like if your build is even making sense. Were you building, magic into MR, right? Basic stuff like that. Like you have to think about your own performance because you can't control your teammates' performance, but you definitely can control yours. And that's the best thing you can start at. And then if you're doing that, you can set an example for your teammates and maybe they modify their behavior well, and then you win.
Yeah, so I want to make this video one day. I've been recording myself playing Dota and recalibrating on rank. I mentioned this on stream a couple times, but I basically had an experiment. So a lot of people will say, like, if you want to climb in video games, like, don't, like, mute everybody because you'll tilt.
Doesn't work. That doesn't work.
So I did this cool experiment. I had 2 accounts, one that I use for streaming so that it doesn't leak my Steam information, and then I have a second account, but Dota recently cracked down, so I stopped doing this. But so I basically calibrated to both at the same time, but in one,
so you try to be the most toxic teammate. Is that what you're saying? And then not? Are you saying that you played both sides? Or you like
no? So I played. I did my calibration matches because you can recalibrate like every year. So I did my calibration matches on both accounts, but in one I was muted, and in one I was talking.
I thought you were trying to say you were toxic in one and not toxic in the other. I was like,
no,
well,
I mean,
wow.
I could be toxic. I'm sure that would be a greater MMR variation, but like it's amazing. I mean, I think it was like an 800 MMR difference, which is, like a couple of ranks. I want to say it's like 20 percentile points.
Unhealthy gamer BG. It's finally happening.
And when you learn how to communicate in games, like it's amazing. You will gain like 1,000 MMR, and there are all kinds of things. Speaking of relationships, it's like the same stuff. Like you got to learn. Like one thing that I found is instead of telling like my carry player to like stop going to some part of the map after they die 3 times in that part of the map, I will ask them, hey, do you want me to place wards so you don't die there again? Or do you want to play around where I have wards? Like, tell me what you want me to do. And like 90% of the time when I ask them, what do you want me to do? And I point out like, hey, I can play around this and place wards where you keep fucking dying. Do you want me to do that? What they'll actually do is just switch to the right part of the map.
Yep.
But if you tell
make it
them,
a question
hey,
that is posed to them.
Yeah, dumbass, stop going there. You keep dying. They'll
be like, I'm going to do it twice as much now. Yeah, and that's what they do. Yeah, and that makes sense because like if you had somebody come and attack you for playing the way that you are when you were failing, especially in the most vulnerable moment, where deep inside you know that you're screwing up and you want to lash out at everyone around you, and then you give them a target to lash out at. Of course, they're going to lash out at you. That's just going to spiral the whole team out.
It's so bad.
You can't do that. Yeah.
It's amazing. Sometimes I'll have teammates who are so good, and I wonder how are they at the same rank as me, and it's because they're just so toxic.
Yeah,
and they can't prevent tilt, and
tilting is probably the worst. It's funny because there's a meme inside of League for a long time, which is like, oh, it's 4v6 right now, that kind of a thing. It's like there's one of your players has moved to the enemy team. When you're saying that, you're the one on the enemy team.
Absolutely. The really crazy thing that I've started to realize is I really do think we can learn just about everything that we need in real life from video games. Like I think the microcosm of gaming, I think is sufficient. Like the stuff around cognitive flexibility, how to not tilt. I mean, here we are talking about making it safe to fail, right? And what's the purpose of that? It's because we don't realize that we're like tilted IRL. Like feeling overwhelmed, you're tilted IRL. Like we blame our teammates, right? So my situation in my life is not my own making. It's a bad upbringing. It's bad friends. It's bad spouses. And there's a ton of data that shows that adverse childhood experiences correlate with trauma and depression and things like that. So people do sometimes have bad situations. But even the ability to rise above those situations depends a lot on these like core video game skills.
Yeah. I think that's actually true. I think it's funny because video games taught me a lot growing up.
What did they teach you?
All kinds of things. Like to be real with you, being able to solve through problems, being able to analyze problems and find different ways to do it. Because the game doesn't care what your emotional state is. The game is always the same. So if you're going to approach a problem emotionally, largely the game doesn't care about that. You're going to lose. You're not going to solve the puzzle. So it taught me to take the emotional feeling that I had, put it on the side for a moment, take a logical approach to it, and then kind of work my way through that. That's where I learned that. It was from games. That's why I do that today. And I do that for everything now. And I do it because I learned it from games when I was younger. And that allows me to go like, all right, I'm getting pissed off. I'm going to take a minute and we're going to look through this logically. And I'm just going to take that emotion, put it off on the side. And when you go through it logically, like logically process that, you largely aren't going to be angry at the end of that conversation. It just kind of goes away. You know, and I think we talked about that last time we had a talk too, was the ability to just kind of take a step back and wait. And it's what I learned from games early on, very early.
So I'm kind of curious, Thor, do you have any thoughts about, so some people are able to like grind a game for hours and hours and hours.
I can do that.
And then they have difficulty grinding IRL for hours and hours and hours. Do you have any sense how to translate being able to grind in a game into grinding in real life?
Immediate emotional feedback or immediate feedback from the game. The game tells you instantly when you get rewarding or when you accomplish a goal or don't accomplish a goal. The best way I can look at this is homework. If you give a student a online test or an interactive test where they are immediately getting feedback from the answers, I find that to be much more compelling a lot of the times for many people than giving them homework where they have to write it all down and they find out the answers the next day. They're less engaged with that because it doesn't give them immediate interactive feedback. And it's funny because I see that more often with people that have ADHD. I don't know if there's a correlation there, but that seems correct to me.
See what more often?
That people are less engaged. If they have ADHD, I find them to be less engaged if they're not getting immediate feedback on the things that are going on, that the actions they're performing.
Absolutely a correlation. So we know that the dopamine reward circuitry in ADHD, so their ability to delay gratification is impaired because the time window between action and reward is very, very tight. So
I think that's what games give you, frankly.
Yeah, so that's really interesting because, you know, there's a... Let me see if I can pull up some more research.
Sure.
I want to show you something.
Yeah, it's more than just dopamine. It's just all feedback, whether it's good or bad. It's all feedback.
Where's that Haggard paper? Oh,
that's why it always made me laugh. Is one of the memorable things that I remember from Earthbound was Earthbound had a section of the game where to progress the story, you had to sit behind the waterfall for like 3 minutes.
Okay.
And do nothing.
Okay. That's tough.
And it was so, in today's world, I feel that many gamers can't do it. That's a difficult one. Like, I really feel it's not a thing that's like super common where waiting is the solution, which is quite funny.
Yeah. So like, I always wondered, like in games like Earthbound, how did they ever figure that out? So, you know, so like I played, did you play little old Castlevanias?
Oh yeah.
So like you played Simon's Quest?
I don't know specifically which ones I played, but I played Castlevania when I was younger.
Castlevania 2 is just an amazing game. So it was like...
So now I want to go back and play these.
It was, I think, the first game where... I don't know if you played like Symphony of the Night.
I did.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Symphony of the Night, yes.
Simon's Quest, I think, was like the first game... I guess they had Metroid, so they sort of like turned the level-based Castlevania into like a more Metroidvania kind of game.
I don't know if I played Simon's Quest.
It's so good, dude. And there was this one part of the game where you have to find some item, and then you have to walk up to a wall, and you have to duck in front of the wall. And you just have to duck and hold it there. And if you hold it for like 30 seconds or 60 seconds, a whirlwind shows up out of nowhere, picks you up, and carries you through the wall. And like, I remember we saw that because we had a subscription to Nintendo Power where they like explained this because that's where there was no internet, so you couldn't like Google things. But I always wondered like how on earth are people supposed to... And there was someone who like gave you a clue in town, but this was like poorly translated from Japanese, so like the English speaking there's like no way, like it doesn't make any sense.
You gave yourself the answer there though.
Yeah, we had to use Nintendo Power.
But beyond that, you get Nintendo Power, you have the solution. You go to school, and now you got the solution. You tell all your friends about it. You're the cool kid.
Yeah, that was like, there was a lot of like discussion.
Kind of the way.
So yeah. I wonder how did they figure these things out?
Probably that way.
The interesting thing that I wanted to mention is there's a really cool. You mentioned this immediate feedback. So there's a really cool principle or like scientific thing called intentional binding, which is what are the things that you can do to increase the repetition of a behavior? Okay, so like if I work out today, what increases the chance that I will work out tomorrow? Now, a lot of people think that the reward that you get from working out correlates with a repetition of the action, right? So if I get rewarded, I will do it again. And there's absolutely a component of that. Really fascinating thing is that there's a particular researcher named Haggard who does a lot of research on intentional binding. And what he discovered was super cool. Like, there are a bunch of studies that show that there are 3 things that you can do to increase, I want to just find the fucking paper, that increase the likelihood that you will, damn it. Okay. That will increase the likelihood of repeating the behavior. And the interesting thing is that this effect is independent of the outcome of the behavior. So people have done scientific studies where no matter what you choose, the outcome is the same. And yet there are certain things that you can do that will increase your likelihood of repetition. And this felt to me like pretty revolutionary. So the first is to think through your options ahead of time. So just consider all the choices. So people who intentionally consider choices are more likely to engage in the behavior. So if I'm
because you're intentionally choosing it, then it's not just a thing you do, it's a thing you chose to do.
Yeah. So instead of I need to go to the gym today, oh my God, you get into this conflict of I need to go to the gym, I don't want to go to the gym.
I get to go to the gym.
Not just what do I want to, how do I want to exercise?
I want to do it.
Not even I want to do it. Just considering your options. This is how crazy it is.
So not even selecting, just having the selection available.
Yeah. Well, I think at some point you make a selection, but having multiple options increases the likelihood of any behavior. So thinking through, do I go to the gym? Do I exercise at home? Even going through that cognitive process. Second thing is to predict the consequences of your actions. So spend some time thinking through what you expect to happen. Even just spending some time thinking about it increases the likelihood that you'll do it, irrespective of what happens. And
the process you're talking about, I do this.
So the third thing is, so this is what I'm sure we'll discover, right? Because you're quite productive, and we'll find that. And anyway, the third thing is some amount of reflection afterward. So spending some time processing, and you don't even have to think you don't have to think in a particular way. You don't have to do something specific. You literally, after a task is complete, you spend 5 to 10 minutes just doing nothing and reflecting. You don't have to reflect in a particular direction. You don't have to discover anything. You don't have to learn anything. And if you kind of think about it, what I've noticed in people I work with is that some people do this automatically. They do all 3 of these things, and they tend to be super productive. And there are a lot of people like me who don't do these things. So
you don't?
I used to not. So what?
So you trained into it?
Sort of, yeah. So I trained into it in a kind of roundabout way, but basically what I used to do is it wasn't do I want to study at the gym? Do I want to study with my friends? It was oh my God, I need to study. I don't want to study. So I was always stuck when I take an action, not thinking through the consequences. I was always stuck trying to work with willpower, overcome myself instead of consider my options, predict the consequences. And then the other thing that I would always do, this is so devastating, probably one thing that's huge, is as soon as something finished, whether it was good or bad, I would move on to the next thing. So if I studied for a test and I take the test and the test is oh man, I didn't get to that chapter, I would immediately try to leave the test behind. Okay, the test is over, I'm done. Time to celebrate. Never spent any time reflecting. Even if my test went well, it's wow, I really studied well for that test. Time to celebrate.
And you don't take into account any of the things that worked or didn't work.
Absolutely. Right.
So you carry nothing into the next environment.
You just empty-headed, you just jump to the next thing. So literally predicting considering your options, making a prediction. It doesn't matter if the prediction is correct or not.
Yep.
And
testing the assumption. Yeah.
And then just reflecting.
Yep. And it's funny because I didn't used to do that either. And then I went homeless. And I have done that ever since. That exact process you're talking about, the whole thing happened after I was homeless because I lived in my car for a year. And after that point, it was I never want that to happen again. Let's slow this down a little bit. Let's be more intentional about the actions that I take, right? All the actions that I'm going to take, I'm going to be more intentional about this. And I started doing that process. I didn't know that was a standardized thing, but that's how I approach anything.
That's the thing, is it's not a standardized thing. So it's biologically accurate, but we don't teach people these kinds of skills. We don't teach people, if you want to do something, what are the actions that you can take that will increase the likelihood of you doing that thing?
Yeah.
We don't know what our brain actually responds to, right? So everyone focuses on building habits. Everyone focuses on building willpower. Everyone focuses on finding the right thing for them. So they're like, oh, the gym doesn't work for me. Whereas like what we're seeing, and this is something I literally just made a lecture about this, about how like we as a society are becoming less adaptable. So if you look at like adaptability as a trait of human performance, as society is like engendering in us less adaptability, because society will meet you where you are. You don't have to learn how to like this game because there are 20,000 games. You can find the perfect game for you. Oh, you sign up for Tinder. We have 20,000. We have 1 million people on the platform. You can pick the perfect person for you. You can find the perfect food for you. You can find the perfect job for you now with like globalization. And so what we're really starting to see, I'm noticing this, like even in the 10 years that I've been practicing clinically, people are less adaptable. And as you become less adaptable, you succeed less. Because then
they're also
what happens,
more extreme in their requirement too.
What do you mean?
Like, so one of the things that I notice quite a lot about is if you have a video game and that video game has all the things that you like except for this one little thing, the game is trash, downvote, bad, awful developer. And that's the thing that I think is really interesting, is because that sort of infinite choice where you can select the perfect game means that when you have one thing that's missing, well, then it's awful. It doesn't matter anymore, right? Because I could find something else. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand with what you're talking about. You're right. It is dramatically less adaptable. It's dramatically less interested in finding any type of situation that almost fits and making that work for you. It's more, well, it doesn't fit even a little bit. 1% is wrong. So screw that thing.
Oh, whoops. Sorry. I'd love to hear more about your homeless time, but can I show you something real quick?
Yeah, sure.
Do you like it when I show papers, or yay, nay?
Yeah, I love that.
So this is a fantastic paper called The Neurocognitive Basis of Human Volition. So this dude's absolute Chad. But there's, let me look at this. So mechanisms of human volition in the brain. There's some really cool stuff. Independent. Oh, I think it's here.
Reading chat.
Yeah,
it's
so
going wild with Chad, dude.
It's such a good. This paper is just so long and dense.
Yeah. I read medical papers all day.
Okay.
A lot.
So, crucially, this binding effect is found only for outcomes that follow one's volitional actions and is absent when the voluntary keep has blah blah. Okay, I think this is the section. Give me a second. It's worth the wait, I promise y'all. Okay, so first, several studies confirm that the ability to choose among several possible actions increases intentional binding. So, just if you have lots of options, it increases the likelihood that you will do the thing. So here, okay, so this is what's crazy. Interestingly, this effect of free choice was found both when all possible actions led to the same outcome and when they led to different outcomes. So this is what's crazy. The outcome, this is independent of the actual outcome of your action. So simply thinking through things, like literally like
different
increases
routes to the same place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what's so interesting when I kind of hear you, like, you know, in some of the stuff you've like really stumbled into, like this idea of like, let's make things less fearful. And the cool thing is, like, it doesn't matter whether they actually build something or they don't build something, because everyone is thinking like, oh, I have to build something to get positively reinforced, where that's not it, right? And you're talking about there's an emotional component to it. Absolutely. And it's not just about failure. It's like literally like the parts of your brain that urge you to act will get boosted if you think through options, if you engage in some kind of behavior. It doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter if it goes well, doesn't go well, whatever. Like
it's kind of funny because people come to me all the time and they're like, I don't feel like I want to do anything today, but I have all these things to do. And I was like, have you tried writing them down? put them on a list. And then one of the things I always tell them is like, a list can be kind of overwhelming for someone at first, right? So you got like 5 items in a list. Make the first item in the list you creating that list. So then you have, at the end of you creating the list, you mark that one off. You're like, I already accomplished one. And now I have all these other options of what I could do. So I think that fits in exactly with what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because that's the piece of advice I'm always giving people. And it works. It works really well for a lot of people. Not everybody. Nothing works for everybody. But the grand majority of people are like, hey, that helped me a lot. I got a ton of shit done today. It's like, yeah.
So one thing that I realized that liberated my list making and helped me so much with lists is that lists don't have to be complete.
They also don't have to be completed in order.
Yeah. So like I started doing this thing a couple years ago where I would make these lists because I was so overwhelmed, and I would have like 15 things on there. And then I would do a couple and I would check a couple things, and I'd look at my list and I'd be like, oh my God, there's so much left to do. I have literally a pile of incomplete lists, or like lists that I've not finished off, and I don't even need to finish them. I realized recently it doesn't matter, because at the end of it, like just getting all this stuff on paper and then like doing a couple things and losing the list tomorrow, it doesn't matter. I'll just make a new list. The process of making a list helps me so much. So I have like this whole stack of just incomplete lists. I'm never going to finish it. That's okay. It's great.
I feel the same way too. Is like I'll create my task list for the day, whatever I need to do, right? Whether it's a mental checklist or just things that I write down or calendar stuff. Sometimes one of those things is just like there's not enough time today. You know, my body doesn't want to keep going. I'm going to go to bed, right? This is kind of how it is, and we move it to tomorrow. It's fine to do that as long as you are spinning the plates in a way where things are effectively getting completed over time. You're fine. You know, some things are critical and they have to be handled right now, but not everything is. You know.
Yeah. So, Thor, I know we've been kind of meandering all over the place. I love this, but is there something in particular that we should be talking about that you think we should spend more time on? Anything that you're...
I don't know. I mean, you wanted to talk about the time that I was homeless. You asked about that. We could talk about that.
So what changed for you?
A lot. Pretty much everything. So I went homeless, God, I don't even know how long ago. It's a long while ago. I lived out of my car for a year, and I was in Colorado at the time. And that happened because I didn't have proper constraints on our business, right? So like I had a business at the time. I was working freelance. I was working on things with another person. The way that it worked is I was creating programming. They were creating 3D models, and we were building these things together and then selling them online, right? And they wanted to renegotiate after probably about a year of us doing this together. And at that point, we were making a lot of money. I was making like 10 grand a month. I was making a ton of money. And for a young person, that's a ton. Even now, it's a ton of money, right? So I was making a bunch of money for this, and I was not careful with my finances. And I was not properly constraining the business. And what this meant is I was spending everything. I was just like, whatever, there's a ton of money. I just do whatever I want, right? I was just being a dumbass and spending on it. I was buying, ordering out, getting all the food that I wanted, doing anything I wanted to do, going to any party that I wanted to do, anything I wanted to. And it was what felt right at the time, but I didn't know how dangerous of a position that put me into. Eventually, that person came by and they're like, hey, I want to renegotiate. I want 80%. I'm going to give you 20% because I do the art and you just do the programming. They didn't respect that the programming was half the job, right? And I said, no, like we have a deal for 50-50. Like, no, we're not doing that. And they said, okay. And they took all of our work and they open sourced it against my wishes. Our income went gone. So they cut off their nose to spite their face. They lost everything as well. But I was in a much more financially precarious position because I was an idiot and spent all of my money. That was on me, right? Their action, awful. But also, I didn't plan for anything like that. So I went homeless. I lived out of my car almost immediately, too. I didn't have money for next month's rent. Like, it was just like, boop, gone. That's a problem, right? And I was on a month-to-month situation like that, which is already highly expensive. So I was out. And I learned throughout that process, it's like, I could blame them, but where's that going to get me? I'm going to get back in this exact same scenario. And I had a lot of time sitting in my car, being on a laptop, taking internet from coffee shops as I was sitting in the parking lot to think about those types of scenarios and be like, what can I do better so that even if another person acts improperly and tries to abuse that sort of connection or what they have over me, that I will not be back here. And that's where I formed all of these ways that I kind of handle problems and logically walk through problems and handle everything in the way that I do, is to prevent that from happening to me again.
So, Thor, let me ask you a question. What was your emotional state at the time?
Oh, at first I was devastated. I was so pissed. I was absolutely enraged, and I was just like, I was just super mad, right? I was like, you've stolen everything from me. And then after a time, I was like, okay, that doesn't get me anywhere. You could be as mad as you want. The rest of the world doesn't give a shit. not even a little bit. That other person doesn't matter, right? You're not fixing the scenario that way. So it came to this point where it's like, I could be mad, but what does that get me? Wasted time. Not getting that back. That's not going to give me anything at all. So I started to change that sort of idea of like, what's the victory condition here? The victory condition is to make sure that this doesn't happen to me again. Let's change the way that I feel and interact through these types of scenarios so that it can't happen. And it, for me, that worked out really well, was just changing kind of the objective, because I think a lot of the times people want to immediately get back everything that was stolen from them, right? Everything that they lost. You got to get back to where you were. And I realized in the very beginning, it was like, I'm not getting that. That's not possible. That's unrealistic, right? I can get something new, something different, but I can't go back to the way that it was. That's already out of the bag, right?
So Thor, what I'm kind of curious about is how are you able to logically disarm your emotions? Like, this is very rare. I think it's effective. Anyone can do it. But I mean, most people, you know, when they get enraged, they can't just, like, I love your framing of like, what's my victory condition? I think that's such a powerful way to deal with emotions. Like, I think you've really stumbled onto something there. I think you stumbled onto a lot of things. But what I'm curious about is, you know, I work with a lot of people who they require help to decompress their emotions. So I'm curious, like, what your internal experience of like, this emotion is not useful, let me discard it. Like, how does that
I honestly
work?
feel like, because it doesn't lead to anything attained that is beneficial. I could sit there and be enraged. I could, when I'm mad at someone on the phone, I could throw my phone, right? I could have an emotional reaction. I could throw my phone. It'd break my phone. Does that solve my problems, or does it make more? Every time you have the violent emotional reaction in the beginning, I don't think that solves anything. I think it always just creates more problems. And at that point, I didn't want more problems. I still don't want more problems. So the way that I felt about it, and the way I still feel about it, is take the emotional thing and kind of put it into a box off on the side, and then look at it and be like, does that make sense? Like, is that going to create more problems? Let's look at all the routes that could come out of that emotional response. Are those routes beneficial? Does this matter right now? Does this have meaning? Does this actually get me anywhere that makes sense? Is it okay to feel that? Because if I do feel it in the way that it is, in the exact way that it is, where does it lead? And that's kind of what I got out of that, is being able to dissect that sort of response before letting it go fully forward. And before that, I was just like, whatever, do anything, who cares, right?
So did that change for you when you had this experience of homelessness, or have you always been like that?
I think it got more defined that way. I was always kind of like that when I was younger. Like, I was more like, you know, more logically thinking, more siding with the logic, but I still have, you know, emotional outbursts as a human being, right? And I had that for a long time until I became homeless. And then after that, it was like, never again. Not allowing that to be a thing. That was a big defining moment for me, was realizing that I'm an adult now, and there are real consequences to not planning. There are real consequences to not thinking about my actions and thinking about what can come out of that, and thinking about, you know, routes and where things lead. And that was like a, no one's going to catch me now. So I have to be my own safety net. I need to take this seriously and think about this, you know?
That, I mean, so that sounds like, you know, like traumatic, but like in a good way.
Oh, yeah. Yes. No, most definitely. It was, for me, it was terrifying. I was like, what if the car breaks down? What am I going to do? Right? You know, like, everything was terrifying.
So
Everything was
I'm
terrifying.
curious, what is your kind of emotional valence now? Like, do you...
Like, do I feel emotions, or?
Yeah, like what's your relationship with your emotions now?
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. The only time that that kind of like kicks in for like, hey, wait a minute, is when I'm having an extreme emotion. When it's like normal, it's like, oh, I'm happy about this, I'm sad about this. Like, it's normal to feel sad. I think that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. There's never an arm's length for every emotion, but it's like I am very angry right now. Wait a minute. I am very sad right now. Wait a minute. Does this make sense? Because I find that when I have a very extreme emotion, if I just kind of let that go and don't think about what could happen in that moment, like, what if I'm really, really sad, like in anguish or something, and I want to break something? Just break something off the wall, right? You have one of those types of violent outbursts because of a strong emotion. Is that going to help you? No. Probably going to hurt your hand. It's going to break the thing on the wall. Everything's going to suck. You have more problems. So when I have a very extreme emotion, and I can feel that it's an extreme emotion for something, then I hold back and I go, wait a minute, this is too much, right? And we got to wait now and figure out what that is. But for normal, average emotion stuff, I guess there's like a filter in place, if that makes sense. Like, there's a filter that says, that's a bit much. Hold up, you know, too far. I guess is the best way to put it.
And how do you see what you're doing in the world? Like, how do you see, like, tell me about what you think about your life.
I think that's an external perspective a lot of the times of like the effect that I'm having on those around me or any of that type of stuff. I do a lot of that I try to do that through objective means. Like I said, analytics before. Things that people are saying, things that people are feeling, things that are, interactions that people are making, because it is hard to form a subjective opinion, especially in social media, especially online, right? It is difficult to form an opinion of how I am doing when there are, as an example, the stream has 3.5 million average viewers per month, right? 3.5 million unique viewers. Grand majority of those people don't say anything. I have no idea how they feel about it, right? But they show up, they watch the stream, they engage with some of the content, and we get a bunch of people into the stream, into the Discord, and I can get at least a gauge on how effective I am being with the types of things that I'm trying to do, how much that resonates with other people. That gives me a kind of basis of understanding for that, even though I don't have the full complete picture. And I don't think there's any way to get the full complete picture, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So what I'm kind of curious about is like, so you when we were talking about being homeless, you said I did those three things. I thought about my choices, I predicted my actions, and I kind of reflected on the consequences.
Yeah.
So what I'm really curious about is when you have these like things that you're doing, right? So you're a streamer, you have Game Jam, publishing house, Ferret Reserve. What, I guess I'm not so interested in the word, motivation isn't really the right word, but I think it's a place to start. So like, what motivates you? Like, what is your driving force when you do this stuff? Like, what goes on? What I'm really curious about is what is the mechanism? Like, what is the experience of motivation for you? Not necessarily like what motivates. Like, oh, I mean, like when you wake up, right? There's some kind of driver that gets you out of bed in the morning, and I'm kind of curious about what is that.
It's kind of interesting, actually, because I think for me, it's definitely not one of those things like, oh, I have to do it, right?
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people get the, I don't get that at all. I don't have that. And I think I used to for some things, but I've kind of crafted my life around the things that I just like doing, right? For instance, the ferret rescue. Ferret rescue is something that I didn't plan on doing originally. Never planned on doing that. I just knew I lived in California, and in California, ferrets are illegal. So when I moved up to Washington, I wanted to get ferrets. I got 2 ferrets from University of Washington. Their names are Snails and Loki. Loki is still alive today. She's like 6 years old. Snails died 3 years later. She had a heart condition. Ferrets largely have heart conditions here. And one of the things that I realized in that moment is like, I'm very sad about this. This sucks. But also I was like, but no, that's okay. And the reason it's okay is because in medicine, they will kill a ferret after 1 year. That's how it works, right? Because these were laboratory animals. And I, took in the laboratory animals. She lived through 3+ years extra on top of what would have been her lifespan. And I realized this is awesome, actually. It's awful that she died, but she got 3 extra years. Her lifespan was quadrupled, right? Over what it could have been. And in that moment, I was like, I feel good about this. I want to do this more. And then I started looking into other rescues. I was like, what is the biggest thing that plagues rescues? Where do people fail doing this? Where do other groups have problems doing this? So I started to break that down, and I found most of the time they go the route of being a 501c3. So they're a nonprofit, and they have issues with funding the entire time until eventually it closes, because ferrets are exotic animals. They're incredibly expensive. It's difficult to take care of them, and they collapse over time. There's very few ferret rescues that are out there as a result of this. It ends up being really difficult. I said, how do we fix that? The community started asking, hey, can I see your ferrets? Hey, can I see your ferrets? And I was like, I'm going to put them on stream and just see what happens. So I ran a test. It was like, maybe this could make a little bit of money to help get rid of that kind of a problem. Well, now today we sit at around 1,200 viewers on there, and it makes enough money so that I can run, eventually, the largest ferret rescue in the United States. The ad revenue from that alone solved that entire problem. So that was me going, I like this thing from an emotional standpoint. I think it does objective good. Other people seem to like it as well. Let's do a test to see if we can do business in a different way so that it can support itself. Let's try that. It worked. Let's keep going, right? And that's kind of how I walked my way through that entire process. And it started with, this is an emotional fulfillment thing for me. How do I have that emotional fulfillment thing in a sustainable way, if that makes sense? In a way where I can make sure that I don't cause harm to these animals by putting a financially inviolable situation forward and then failing later on and just having a huge problem for a bunch of animals that I was supposed to be taking care of, right? So that's kind of my whole process for walking through that, if that makes sense.
That does. So I'm kind of curious and even a little bit skeptical is not quite the right word, but I'm curious if there's more. So you're saying you do this for emotional fulfillment?
That one definitely, most definitely. There's something.
What about the others? Oh, okay. Yeah, say more.
I don't know how to describe this to you. There's nothing nicer than like laying on the floor with all these freaking ferrets, right? And they're just awesome animals. It's just really cool. There's a deep emotional thing for me for that. And I cannot place where that comes from, but knowing that I have extended the life of all of these creatures and they're having better conditions than they did before. Because I do a lot of medical research for this. I look into all the different ways we can treat them. Part of what I do is nutrition and medical research to try and form new treatments for them. And in many cases, I've been able to find ways that we can pass that off to the veterinarians that we work with. They enacted a plan for them and we've saved their lives. That isn't a financial incentive for me. That is 100% an emotional incentive for me. That feels very good because I know that I'm making a difference in a way that isn't like a financial gain difference. It's in a this animal gets to live. That's really nice. And especially in situations where people treat them really badly. So I know that I can correct the situation and fix it in a way that extends something's life, right?
So I'm curious, Thor, do you find that there are two layers of your, and I'm kind of like asking a leading question here. Sure. So you strike me as someone who is not very emotionally driven, right?
Usually not.
And so what I'm kind of curious about, so that's why I'm kind of like a little bit confused.
It's
and
rare.
I kind of have a hypothesis, but I'm kind of curious whether you find that there's two layers. Would you say that there's two layers of your emotional experience? There's like one where you're kind of, it's not like, you have a lot of exercise over it. And then there's another layer of emotions that feels different, right? Because gratification of your positive emotions. Okay.
I don't think there's a multi-layer system there. I think that to me, it's one of those things where it's like, I understand that this is a positive thing for me. I think that I am getting positive kind of feedback from this in a way that's emotional for me, but also can I do that more in a way that adds for other people and adds for these animals? It's a mutual benefit thing at that point. The animals win, the viewers win, I win. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense.
I think you'll see that across everything that I try to do is like, I don't like the idea of one person winning. It's the whole thing of, rising tide raises all ships. Anytime that's going on, like that's why I brought the moderators on full time. That's why I do all the free knowledge that we can do on the Discord. Everything that I try to do is with that because this is funny because it feels greasy otherwise. It feels wrong, right? If you like the way that I feel about it is if I become a millionaire, I probably screwed up. I did something wrong, right? It's like put it into other things that actually have meaning and do something of tangible benefit. And the ferret rescue to me is definitely an emotional fulfillment thing. But when having something like that where the stakes are so high, where things can go wrong and then animals can be hurt because you didn't plan ahead, there has to be that logical component of making sure it's self-sustainable, which is exactly what the stream is for. So it's the logic side ensuring that the situation is safe enough for me to get the emotional fulfillment and do something that I think is good that helps other things like the animals, the ferrets, and the community. Because we also spread a bunch of knowledge in that too. Try to spread it around.
Can I think for a second?
Sure.
So basically what I'm kind of thinking through internally is slightly more esoteric concepts. So I'm kind of hunting for an answer. And so when I see your life, I see a lot of two things, Dharma and Karma. So Dharma is Dharma. Are you familiar with that term?
Yes.
So
that's the things that you are obligated to do, that you're intended to do, versus the things, or
it gets translated as duty usually.
Yeah, duty. Yeah. Okay.
But I think it's a different emotional valence from should. So I think it's and then the other thing is karma. So like that what is happening in your life feels to me like a chemical reaction that is playing out. That a couple of pieces were put in and there was a predisposition for something, and you're kind of leaning into that. That's kind of why I ask about this double layer of emotion. So I find that for a lot of the work that I do, there is like sort of a different feeling. So one is like a deeper sense of dharma, or a feeling of like rightness, which can be emotionally gratifying. But I think that the fluctuation of the emotional experience of those things is almost like independent of this other quality. And in fact, I think that it's the second thing that allows me to sustain the emotional variance, right? So like if I loved streaming and I did it for positive emotions, then that would not work, because the emotions are not always positive. Sometimes they're negative. So the key thing about dharma from almost like a scientific perspective is it is that which allows you to act and persistently act outside of the variance of emotions and outcomes. So the reason that I'm kind of asking you this kind of stuff is because I get a lot of vibes from you that track to this concept in the meditative tradition from having done a lot of meditation in a past life. I think I've mentioned that to you before, because you intuit a lot of things that are like normally taught. And so when they say like, okay, like, so if you spawn and you're level like 50 as opposed to level 10, how do we understand that? Oh, like you just XP'd up prior to spawn, and then you carry over, when you respawn, you carry over some experience.
You're saying I'm on New Game Plus. Okay.
You're on New Game Plus. Yeah. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Yeah. Right. So many of the things in your life feel very New Game Plus-ish to me. So your capacity for like discrimination, and by that I mean like being able to like, and your internal awareness, your capacity to like think through, okay, like is this a good thing or is this not a good thing? Let me abandon it. That's very rare. So like most of us, when we think through things and it's a bad thing, we still keep doing it.
I can't do that.
Right? So
that's what I learned at that moment when I was telling you when I was homeless, is like, I didn't do that before that. Not really. Not to the capacity I do now.
Fair enough. So and this is where I don't know if like, I have a particular way of viewing the world. It doesn't make it correct. And we could ultimately say that everything comes down to there's just one layer of like emotional valence, and that's what it is. But really, like everything you're describing like screams to me of these two concepts. And I was just curious if you have encountered those before, if you think about it, because I don't.
I've never encountered that. I guess that to me that kind of splits between like emotion and logic, because the emotional need is like, hey, this feels great to do this. I feel fulfilled doing this, but it's beyond that. There's like something else there, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I just can't, it's hard to describe.
That's what I'm talking about. So is there a third variable? And the logic is about the implementation. So once the driver is there, the logic is like, like
how do we do it?
Exactly. Yeah. It's the how. It's not the what direction you're going in. And
for me, it's like I have the thing is like, why do I want to do this? How do I want to do this? And then at the end of it, it's like, okay, if I do this, does that make me drop anything else? That's a big one. Does it get in the way of any other things, objectives that I have? Can I make it so that it's sustainable in a way that I can step away from it and it works? Can I make this so it expands? Like there's so many different things that go into that. It's a lot of pieces, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but all that comes afterward.
Yeah.
Do you get what I'm saying?
All of it comes afterward?
So let me ask you this. Is the reason you do it because it needs to be done?
I think the world is an objectively better place if I do it. So it becomes a compelling factor.
How do you understand the specificity of how you make the world a better place? Like, why do you care to make the world a better place in particular ways?
I can't make the world a better place in all ways. I can do it within my purview. There is a limit to what I can do as an individual. So because of that, I want to do that specifically in this case because I can make a difference here. It is possible within what I know, my knowledge of it, my interests, and my means, if that makes sense.
So, but there are many ways in which you could make a difference. How do you decide which ones to do? Is that your emotional response to a particular thing? Like, why ferrets as opposed to anything else?
So, for instance, if I decided to get very deeply into an aspect of something that I don't know anything about right now, it'd be very hard to make a difference inside of that area. The reason why is because there would be a perception that I'm not an expert in that area. The perception from the general public means that it's much harder for you to make a change there, make a difference, a real difference. By going down this route and showing all this stuff with ferrets and doing everything that I have and having all this information and all these things that I'm doing, it makes it much easier to make a difference, because now we have something that is widely seen as being positive force inside of that area. Now I can actually make a difference. But if it's an area that I'm starting from scratch on, there's all those pieces that have to fall into place first before people trust you enough that you can make a difference, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. So I'm kind of curious, because my Geiger counter is going off the charts, but when I talk to you about it, it doesn't seem accurate, right?
Okay.
So I'll just like share my own perspective, and I think this is just something I just got to ask you.
Waiting for the golden question to uncrack, because maybe there's like a piece that's missing there that I don't understand.
I don't think there is a piece that you misunderstand. That's why what I'm going to do is just share my perspective, and I'm curious what you think about it.
Sure.
So I have a logical mind. I have an emotional mind. So if we look at emotions, like we also know that there's like two basic kinds of emotions. There's our more primitive emotions like anger, fear, and then we actually have the second layer of emotions called social cognitive emotions, completely different part of the brain. Pride, shame, guilt. That second layer of higher human order emotions requires other humans to be present. So a reptile, I don't know if a reptile ever is capable of feeling guilty, but a reptile can feel anger or fear. Mm-hmm. So these are the layers of the self. So in my experience, there is a third layer of stuff. So this is where I would say Dharma and Karma operate. So sometimes when I'm meditating, for example, like I have a particular like insight, and then I will sometimes act on that insight, and it's weird. Like sometimes I will not have spoken to someone in many, many years, and I'll reach out to them, and there's something kind of going on in their life, and it's kind of like spooky. So like there's something about my experience of life makes me think that there's a third layer of stuff. And when I think about the work that I do, I think about what is logically good, and I think about what is emotionally fulfilling. And clinical practice is sufficient. So in clinical practice, I would make way more money than I make now, because doctors get paid very well in the United States. And then I find the work very fulfilling. Like it's great. Like I love doing it. I trained really hard at this. Every day is like fun, really.
Yeah.
I tend to work with people for maybe a year or two. So I don't usually work with people for like 10 years. It's like people come in, we help them, and then like I get to meet new people. Very intellectually stimulating. I can work a lot in a short amount of time, plenty of space for leisure activities, emotionally gratifying. And yet something about that was not fulfilling, right? So I guess that's maybe the dimension that I'm kind of talking about, is like there's a third dimension of emotional valence and what is logically a good idea or a bad idea.
Did you feel like I guess at that point, like beat the level sort of a thing? Too comfortable?
Not necessarily. So actually it was fulfilling. So this is where I experienced what I can best be described as a calling, right? So we use some of these words like calling. And I think that tracks to things like Dharma or Karma, and now it makes sense to me. Like, so I have a karmic debt to pay to the internet. And
there's the golden word.
What?
The calling.
So tell me.
It felt
about
like
that.
This is correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
So see, that's the thing. So this is correct. That doesn't come. I'm making a statement here, a hypothesis, which I'm asking you to agree or disagree with. In my experience, and what I would venture for you, is that this doesn't come from logic or emotion.
No. It was a totally outside thing.
Where does it come from?
I have absolutely no idea. Because when that happened, that this is correct, that was the moment where I understood that snails died, but she had lived 3 extra years. And that was the moment where I was like, this is the correct thing. I want to do this more. It wasn't even I want to do this more. It's I'm going to do this more.
Yes.
How do we make that work? How do we have that? How does that function? How do we build this in a way that it isn't like the failures that other people have had? How do we build this in a way that it actually works? Do it. And then kind of throw everything together, make the hypothesis. All the logic stuff comes in after that.
Yeah, so I smelled it.
I was wondering when you were going to come, because I was like, there's something missing here. Something's not being communicated.
What I'm so curious about is like, I have an understanding of this stuff, and I can explain it if you want, but like, sure. I'm so curious because you get there on your own. So I kind of like, I can't explain it if you want to, but that also, like, there's some amount of personal exploration. There's some amount of like reading a bunch of books, but what I'm really curious about is how do you understand that? I don't want to pollute you with
the calling portion.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that's one that's kind of outside of my purview, frankly. And it's funny because it's not like a religious experience or anything like that. It was just like, this is correct. We're going to do this now. Like, that's how that's going to go, right? I'm going to take the emotional side of this. This is definitely fulfilling in that part. It is the logical side of it. This can be done, right? This is possible to do. And then also that third esoteric component of whatever that is, I want to do this. This is getting done, right? And then on top of it, it's also the other stuff for me too, which goes into the emotional side of it, which is there is a real benefit to the animals. There's a real benefit to people that get to engage with this. And it's something that I find to be good in the world. So that's all on the emotional side. And the objective side is like, cool. Like the illogical side is like, cool, it can pay for itself. I don't have to worry about that. I never have to worry about it collapsing, right? If I position this correctly, which is always a thing. You always have to figure it out.
Are you aware of other things that come from that third layer? So we talked about the ferret thing. The ferret thing is like, that's Geiger counters off the charts, but I'm curious, like, have you noticed that layer in other parts of your life?
Constantly. So doing free and open information. I gained that from the hacking community. When I joined in with the hacking community, I go to DEF CON, I compete and everything like that. A big part of being a hacker is spreading as much information as possible, teaching other people to solve problems that are difficult with interesting solutions, right? So my Discord's completely structured that way. I don't need to do that. I could definitely gate that behind a whole bunch of paywalls or other bullshit. But that component says, nope, do this free. Do this free and release it to everyone. And that's exactly why I do that, is it makes sense to do that. It is the correct action to take. You know, anytime that I'm taking a stance on those types of things, there is that extra component. It's not a purely logical, not a purely emotional. It's that third piece. And I've kind of traveled with those and used those for different reasons of choosing different things I want to focus on, right? The ones that are truly important to me are the ones that third component takes place. And it does happen quite a bit. There's a lot of things there. And I think for me, that's what defines me as myself. If that, because we all have emotions, we all have logic, but the things that I decide, not even decide, the things that I am compelled to do from that third piece is what I determine to be me, if that makes sense.
Yes, I think that is consistent. So I'm curious, what do you think that third piece is?
That's difficult to discern. Me, right? Like, everybody's going to have their thing. I guess that for me is my thing, whatever it's going to be. And I feel compelled to engage in that thing. Right?
Can I ask about, so I know you've had, can I ask about your relationships?
Sure, yeah.
So I'm curious, does the third element, does that inform you about anything relating to your relationships?
Yeah, actually. Yeah.
Can you share that with us?
Yeah, when I got married, actually, that was a big thing. It's like, that felt correct. That felt like this was the thing that I want to do. This is exactly what it is. There's an emotional side to it. There's a logical side to it. The emotional side is like, hey, this relationship is really working. Been together for a long time. This all makes sense. Logical side is like, do you have enough money to buy a ring? You're going to look like a dumbass, like that. It's like a normal one. It's quite funny. But then like also the other things is like, am I jumping into anything too soon? Does it make sense to actually go and try this? Is anything going to work? Right. And then go along with that. Right. And yeah, that relationship ended. Really devastating. But at the time, in that moment, I could take that as a definition for me of like, this is the right time to do this. I feel correct about this for all their aspects of this. And there's that third component that says, go for it, In
terms of getting married?
Yeah. Well, in terms of, proposing and going along.
What does the third layer say about the end of your marriage?
That it's fine. That it doesn't always work out. And like, for me, I gained a lot of experience from that. I learned a lot there. It is, even though it ended, that's okay. And this is going to be such a weird way to post it. It's like an old multiplayer game, right? Multiplayer games are amazing at their peak. They're phenomenal. And one day that multiplayer game ends. Nobody's playing it anymore. Doesn't work. And we kind of can sit around and pine for the old Dave when it was perfect and it was at its peak and it's amazing. Or we could be like, I was there, I experienced that, and I can remember that fondly, and I can take that into account for the rest of my life. You know, and I see it as the second piece. You know, I had that experience and it was great, and I learned a lot from it, and there was upsides and downsides, and I'm happy about it, you know.
Yeah, so that's weird, man. Like I'm really like, this Geiger counter is going off the charts because like this is so consistent, right? So like this is where, yeah, it's so interesting that you never like learned this stuff. So this like kind of makes me feel spooky because like this is where all the things that you were saying are written about, right? So even your perspective, like the conclusions that you're coming to, the existence of the third layer of stuff, and I
don't know where it comes from. So
yeah, no,
sad.
I mean, even your hesitance to describe it. I ask you like, what is it, and you say it's me, and you don't give it quality. So this
It's
was
hard
what's really,
to.
this was
That's
really,
the one where it's kind of difficult. Yeah.
yeah. So this what's really cool is like the Sanskrit description of what that third place is neti neti, and neti
Okay.
is not this. So it is not this, not this. So it cannot be
So
described.
it's not the emotion. It's not the logic. It's something else.
It cannot be described. It is that which cannot be described. So
Yeah.
it's me, right? So you can't attach words to it. And it's really interesting because you don't even try to attach words. You don't even get into that, which tells me that you really understand it because you're like, okay, it doesn't have a form or a shape. It is like that which is left over.
It's also something that I find I cannot anticipate. When it happens, I'm like, yep, this. And it's like, where'd that come from? I don't know.
Yeah, it's
You know, like,
so that's
that's-
another feature of it. It is spontaneous.
Yeah.
So
And there's no way to plan for it. It's an extra variable that shows up, I guess is the best way to put it. Yeah.
yeah, so I'm curious though, have you found things that get you closer to it? Or things that move you further away?
I would say yes. I think there's defining factors there, which is why I described it as me, as self, right? Like, a good example of this, being incredibly transparent with things, right? Transparent with business, transparent with the ferret rescue, transparent with that. I found very early on, one of the first things that I wanted to fix was we were starting a game studio, and I wanted to do a Kickstarter. And I found that the general standard was there's a whole bunch of these games that do Kickstarters, and they run away with the money. So I was like, how do I fix that? And the compelling factor like stepped in and said, why don't you stream all of it? Why don't you just show everybody, right? And it kind of breaks the perception of, oh, I can't stream as a programmer, I can't stream as an artist, I can't stream at these types of things, I can't show people the world this. And it also breaks the perception of he's not working on anything. I can see him working. It removes any whispers of that immediately because people can see it. There's a track record for that. And I think it was the first thing that I was like, okay, that worked here. What if that works over here? What if that works over here? Now it makes sense. Now it starts stepping away from just being a compulsion there where it's like, this is a standard for me now, is make sure that this is always part of things that I do as a carrying thread, because it's not just that it works, it's that it is correct, if that makes sense. It is a correct thing in the way that I have defined things. It is correct, right? And I feel like that is a better option. In fact, I've even seen other people implement that. We actually have a veterinarian here where they have glass windows on everything. For absolutely everything, you can watch your pet in surgery anytime. You can see everything that all of the attendants are doing all the way in the back, which is a wild concept. That's not something you ever see. But they have this set up, and the customers, like the people who come in with their animals, and they're super nervous, they're way less stressed out because they see what's going on. They know what's happening. They may be upset because it's a crisis situation, but they can see. And they don't have to sit there wondering, is something going to go wrong? Are they going to come out and tell me my dog is dead? They can see what's happening. They know in real time. And it's actually really interesting. It's like a really interesting thing. So I've seen other people implement the same thing, and it makes sense, right? So that's why it feels that way to me.
Yeah, so it's once again interesting. So I think like there's what you described as transparency, I would describe using the Sanskrit word Satya, which means truthfulness.
Okay.
So there's also like weird angles to this, and I'm just kind of curious. But like so I also noticed that you're accumulating a lot of Shakti or energy. So there's like all these like texts that say that when you start living in accordance with Satya, you will accumulate like energy and things will begin to manifest around you. And this is very like spooky and gets turned into, you know, The Secret and this stuff for like Oprah's book club. I don't put a whole lot of stock into that.
That's okay.
But I, you know, it's so interesting to see so many principles that I've learned about or studied about. And it seems like you're kind of like living them. So like when you live a life of truthfulness, I certainly found that it has been very, very like good for me too. So I started like intentionally becoming more and more truthful. And there's a really interesting, see, a lot of people don't realize that being truthful in life actually makes your life better and makes you more powerful. So if we think about lying, lying is all about the avoidance of consequences. And if lying is about the avoidance of consequences, then you can continue engaging in behavior that you don't have to pay the consequences for.
And you should be, because it's usually more inefficient, whatever it is that's going on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so the really interesting thing is that when I kind of like stopped lying, I think maybe once in a blue moon I'll lie. Like I want to say maybe 2 or 3 times a year.
But are you lying right now?
I don't think so. Maybe this is one of the 2 or 3. But what I really found is that once you stop lying, it changes your behavior. So if you take lying off of the table, the way that you have to live your life changes.
Yeah.
And
I used to lie all the time as a kid. Constantly.
What?
When I was a kid, I lied constantly. I was constantly worried of consequence. I was like trying to avoid all that, lie about everything, right? Like, and I realized over time, I was like, this is a lot of energy to like upkeep all this shit. Like, because you're constantly like trying to spin the plates on like which lie did you tell to who, and it just turns into this web of just like, why? It's just waste. It's all wasted energy. It's ridiculously wasted energy. I think that was something I grew out of because it was just stressful and stupid, right? You know, it's just a huge waste of time, massive waste.
Yeah, so that's interesting because that's a very logical take.
Yeah.
And that's where in sort of these Eastern systems, there's like a weird esoteric take, which is that when you say it's a waste of energy, they also equate out that leakage of energy with like less manifestation in the world.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely, I could see that being absolutely true, but not in a
How?
manifestation way. The way that I see it true is like this. If you are spending all of your time upkeeping the web of lies that you've created, how are you forwarding your life? Where do you have time for that? Where do you have time to put it into things that could give you benefits going forward? You're spending all this time maintaining this bullshit that doesn't actually give you anything tangible when
But
you could be
doesn't-
learning a skill.
But doesn't
Right.
lying to people advance you in many ways? Like,
Sometimes, but not forever. And that's the biggest problem with that, is if you get caught in a lie, it can set you all the way back to ground zero, or before that, you could lose everything. When if you spend the time on actually learning something, you can spend the same amount of energy doing that, you keep that forever. And that's kind of where that went for me. Is like, yeah, I can understand that being a aspect of manifestation, but it's not really a manifestation. It's
localized to you.
Yeah, it's localized to you.
There's no
And you are-
connection to outside things.
That's how it feels to me. Yeah. You are creating scenarios in which you have more chance of succeeding because you are spending time on cultivating keys for all these doors that you might, arrive to, if that makes sense. And otherwise you're just spending time on nothing, right? You're spending time on maintaining this big bullshit around you. It doesn't make any sense.
I think there's that. I think that's a fair take. I'm still somewhat conflicted about whether there is some kind of connection to outer things or there is some kind of manifestation. And that also gets to this, this third layer, because where does the third layer exist?
It could be, right?
Do you think that the third layer
that.
is completely localized to you?
That I don't know, right? That's something that is an impossible question to answer. It could be a feeling thing. It could be like, wow, there's like, I think a lot of people describe that as like kind of divine intervention, right? You're like, I had God told me this thing and I went and did the thing because I felt compelled to do it and that came from God, right? But I'm not really all that religious. So for me, it's like, well, if that is a religious experience, I could describe it as a religious experience. But in reality, for me, it's like, does that make sense for me? Not really, because I don't spend a lot of time on that, right? So it's one of those things where it's like, this came from somewhere. I don't know where. And that's like you said, it's the not this, not this. So what is this? Don't know.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And I'm okay with not having the answer there, right?